Somebody wrote an article, I believe it was the New York Times, a woman who wrote that her daughter is a tomboy, not transgender. And she said that she is gender role non-conforming, not gender non-conforming. And a lot of people took issue. They attacked her mercilessly. I came into the fray and said, did you actually read the article? It was a very,
Yeah.
a daughter positive, female positive, and trans positive article. And they just went to town on her. And then they went to town on me when I tried to say to them, hey, smarten up. You don't know this person. But one of the things they took offense was this again this gender role non-conforming versus gender non-conforming, and they're saying it's the same thing. So, what are your thoughts on that? The distinction between the two? I think they're quite different. But what are your thoughts?
This is actually one of the things that Money worked on sorting out, and it was very useful, distinguishing gender identity from gender role. And
Right.
gender role is the role we're expected to play as men and women. So, for example, as a parent who is a woman, I'm expected to be a mother. And that may sound obvious, but the culture expects different things from mothers than from fathers. For example, they expect mothers to be more helicoptery. They expect us to be more fussy. They expect us to be more affectionate, more physically affectionate, more verbally affectionate. So that's a gender role that gets slapped onto me. We could just talk about parents, but we tend to talk about mothers and fathers, and that distinguishes a gender role. Gender identity is how you feel. And the truth is that for many of us who are not transgender, when we're asked about whether or not we feel that we are men or women, many of us will say we're not sure what that means. And maybe that's because we haven't experienced a conflict between how other people see us and how we see ourselves. So we haven't really thought about our gender identities. But it's also possible that for some of us, gender identity is felt more intensely than for others of us. And also that gender identity may be felt more intensely at certain times and less intensely at other times. I think, for example, that for a lot of us, gender identity is felt most intensely when we're in a sexual relationship. So when we're having a sexual relationship is when we really vividly feel gendered. And when I talk with people about it, for a lot of people, that makes sense to them. That that's when they feel kind of like, this is when I'm really a man or really a woman. In the gender sense is when I'm engaging in a sexual relationship with somebody, a vivid one, not just long term, but like actually having flirting or having sex. So I think distinguishing those really helps. And what's going on for that mother, for example, is this problem where people think gender is simple and where they think gender is all from the inside and it never comes from the outside. And we know that's not true. Gender is dialectic between us. It is something that we probably has biological components, probably also has cultural components. There are different cultural concepts. I mean, a lot of cultures have similar gender concepts, but some of them differ by different cultures. So, for example, I mean, I'm from, my parents are from the Polish peasant class. And it's very clear to me that within the Polish peasant class, daughters are expected to be very attentive to the family, very successful, very much have our shit together. And sons are expected to sort of disappoint. Men are going to drink and they're going to not always show up when you want them to show up. And so the expectations for girls are significantly higher academically, professionally. That the academic expectations for girls in my experience in the Polish people who have descended from the Polish peasant culture is that more is expected of girls than is expected of boys. That's not to say we're expected to be necessarily in charge of households, but we are expected to keep it together and get the food on the table and get it done when the men don't show up. So that's a different cultural role than in some other cultures, for example.
Mm-hmm. Now you're talking though about the adults or the parents. So for this case though, with this mother, she's talking about her daughter who is a tomboy. So now we're talking about a child. And again, she's saying that her daughter has no confusion whatsoever about her sense of self. I mean, she feels like a girl who just happens to like to play boy sports or, dress up a certain way. So again, that caused a lot of controversy. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, that sounds like, I don't know, a gender role non-conforming. She seemed to be, again, according to her subjective sense, she's okay with being a girl. She's not confused about that.
Right. And tomboy was a legitimate category when I was growing up in the 70s
Right.
and 80s. And it was a useful category. I wandered into that category a lot myself. And it was useful because it was a way to say, there's nothing wrong with this one. Right. It's just she messes with the gender roles, which is one of the things that a lot of us that were strong girls did. Right. Because you're not supposed to be a strong girl. So, and I don't mean that I was physically strong, but I was, I hung out with my brothers a lot. I was rambunctious. I climbed trees. I liked being rough and tumble. I liked being filthy. I mean, all that stuff that supposedly for many is not appropriate for girls. But it reminds me, actually, I was smiling because it reminds me of a time when my son was about 4 years old. And we had a neighbor friend over who was a girl who was about 7 or 8. And she was very tomboyish. She still to this day is very tomboyish. And she and my son were having food in the dining room, and I was listening from the kitchen. And my son said to her at one point, "Hey, are you a boy or a girl?" And the girl said, "I'm a girl." And she was very offended. She said, "I'm a girl." And he said, "Okay, cool." Because for him, this wasn't an offensive question. And then she said to him somewhat defensively, "What are you?" And he said, "I'm a boy." And, for him, it was that wonderful cluelessness, right, about the way that gender is politicized. She had picked up that gender is politicized and that it's offensive to call somebody the wrong gender. But I think that if we had that sort of gentleness about it, the question might never even occur to my son, for one thing, right? Why does it matter? But then when he asked it, there would be that innocence of, it's just a question and it's not that big a deal. I think he was just genuinely curious as to what she was, because she and he had a great time doing stuff that mostly he did with boys.
Right.
So it was confusing to him. And her mother and father are great people who just rolled with it. They didn't care. They let her dress as she wanted to dress and let her do what she wanted to do, and just decided this is just a kid, right? And so nothing. But then I've had other friends for whom, when their child is like that, they start asking me questions about whether or not this is transgender. And a lot of times I say to them, remember back in our day when everybody just was all over the place and it was okay? We don't have to go. If that's where your child needs to go, we can talk about that, but you don't need to go there. If it's just messing with these cultural expectations, let them just play, right? Childhood is about play. And this is part of the way that we play, if we're allowed to, is through the roles of gender we play.
Yeah, and that concerns me because I want children to be able to explore whatever they are, whoever they are, do what they want to do, regardless of how they may turn out in one way or another, whether their orientation, identity, preferences, anything like that. But it seems so many people these days just want to jump all over that versus, allowing a child to be a child. Don't politicize things. And I said this to my class, and apparently one of my students got offended when I can't give the whole context, but I said, I've got 3 daughters. I have not raised 3 girls. I've raised 3 human beings. Sex, gender, very rarely, if ever, enters into the conversation. The only time it really does is when we're talking about my 2 older daughters, they're old enough to date. My youngest one is not. So when they were dating, we would have discussions, and they happened to date boys. So being a man and also just knowing about how guys are, I hate to stereotype, but I'd have to give them the, the proper lessons on, don't trust this and that. But that was secondary to, I don't care who you're dating. I don't care who you're interested in. You make sure that person treats you right, that they give you the respect that you deserve. You express it. That was what the conversation was all about, right? And someone took offense to that. It's like, no, I want to raise my daughters as, again, individuals, as human beings, as self-efficacious, self-loving, people. And that's, I think, how parents should raise their children. The thing is, though, we're talking now about gender or sexual identity or anything like that. I find as a parent, people are too quick to assign even, let's say, career expectations, musical expectations, all of these things. And so when I see all this, and sometimes people have a hard time seeing that, when I see people, politicizing all of these multitude of facets that make a human being who they are, I don't see it as gender issue or transgender. I see it as you're not allowing a child to develop in a healthy way. A child needs to kind of figure these things out themselves, about anything.
We see the same thing with class, for example, right? Kids of in my son's group, a lot of them are children of professors, and there's certain class expectations that are intellectual class in this case, but also professional class expectations that are really rough on kids. For example, for kids who really want to work with their bodies and their hands, who want to go into the trades, are really looked down on as sort of, that's not a white collar pursuit, and therefore it's not a legitimate profession. And so I see that happening in the same way. And for me, that's how that gender stuff plays out, is this sort of attitude of some people are better than others by virtue of the way that they are as they grow up. And it strikes me that, we should use Dr. King's approach of that it's not about the color of your skin, it's about the content of your character. Could we focus on the content of character and get our children to treat each other well, to have self-respect, to be decent to other people. And that strikes me as, sort of the core, what are we trying to do is raise human beings.
Right, exactly. And that's, again, this goes back to identity politics.